Well, I'm Richard Bate, President of the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health. Still not really sure, 6 months in, how I find myself as the President, but I'm here with you today. Look, it's fantastic to see so many members of the occupational safety and health professional coming together over the next 3 days to learn, to challenge thinking, to share experience, and to shape what the future of our profession looks like. Yeah, and it's great to be here in the IOSH Keynote Theatre with you this morning. Okay, so today it's a really, really important day. It's International Workers' Memorial Day, a moment organised by the Trades Union Congress. And for those of us who have lost lives through work, through accident, through ill health, or through long-term exposure to harm, I think it's really important to remember that behind every statistic is a person, a family, and importantly, a community. And while today is a day of remembrance, it's also a day where we commit ourselves not only to remembering the fallen, but really importantly, to fight for the living. And also, because today is also World Day for Safety and Health at Work, led by the International Labour Organization, the ILO is using the day to launch its global report on the psychosocial working environment, global developments and pathways for action, which you can also access from the QR code that you can see on the screen behind me. That focus could not be more timely. As OSH professionals, we know that work is no longer just a physical experience, it's also a psychological one. Factors like workload, autonomy, leadership behaviors, trust and fairness shape how people experience work every single day. And when these psychosocial hazards cause harm, they don't remain abstract concepts anymore. They become real hazards. Hazards that must be recognized, assessed, and managed with the same seriousness as any physical risk. That belief is reflected throughout the program in this theatre over the next 3 days. Poor mental health is a huge and increasing cause of absence from work. It lies at the heart of the UK's current problem of economic inactivity, which is damaging the quality of people's lives and blighting the UK economy's competitiveness and prospects for growth. Some of you, I hope, will have seen this IOSH white paper, From Perks to Prevention. Now, obviously you can access that through the QR code. It is a really well put together document. I've got a copy printed which I keep with me for days like today. I think what I really want to reflect on is some of the findings. More than 55% of business globally are citing that mental health and stress, anxiety issues, particularly around depression, as their leading workplace health and safety challenge. In the UK, we get 65% of respondents to a poll are saying that they're reflecting that 67% of staff are claiming that they have some form of stress-related illness. That's a huge number. But I guess, does the British public fully appreciate the extent of poor mental health in our workplace? And even if they do, I think that the question that we should ask, is there still an element of denial going on? Do people really want to admit that a large proportion of the British workplace are actually on long-term sick? We know it's an issue, particularly with younger people. 65%, that's Generation Z, they're reporting that 65% are reporting stress and anxiety. 45% of those are actually being treated. That's a catastrophic number for our economy. And even some OSH professionals, I know this is going to be the slightly contentious thing I say, well, one of the slightly contentious things I say. As OSH professionals, I think sometimes we might be a little bit uneasy about accepting the focus on mental health and well-being. And I think there's also a concern amongst professionals that we could be over-medicalising this concern when in reality maybe it's just day-to-day life stress. I think there's also a consideration that shouldn't we be concentrating on the real issues? Shouldn't we be concentrating on, falls from height, humans versus machines, dust and particulates? I think it's something that we're not going to get away from. And I think us as professionals, we're all increasingly aware that this mental health issue is there, but are we actually addressing it? Is it an elephant in the room? Well, I'm pleased to say that for the next 3 days there won't be an elephant in this particular room, because we're going to talk about these issues openly. So you're going to hear from a lot of really interesting people. You're going to hear from some of those people during my session. So fortunately you don't have to listen to me for the whole of the next 30 minutes. But you're going to hear some, and hopefully join in with some frank conversations around workplace culture, trauma, harassment, sickness, and really importantly, inclusion in the workplace. And together we'll explore the changing expectations of Gen Z. I've already mentioned Gen Z once. I'm not picking on Gen Z. The future of OSH careers, the principles that underpin our profession, and what we need to do to stay relevant and be trusted as OSH professionals. But we're also here to protect the mind of the worker, not just the body. We need to prevent workplace stress from happening and thereby causing psychosocial issues at work. This is paramount. And our white paper, which I showed you a few seconds ago, which you can download, I think if nothing else, maybe it does have some advice, but it will initiate conversation. I hope that you're able to download it, and really remember that when you do read these documents that we produce, we'd love to hear your feedback. Okay, moving on. This takes me on to say that our profession is evolving. I'm not going to ask you to show hands. It's not that kind of session. And we're facing unprecedented challenges that face us every day. Mental health concerns I've already talked about. The rapidly evolving work environments. Really importantly, the integration of artificial intelligence and automation, climate change impacts on worker welfare and safety, and the ongoing effect of how we reimagined work during the pandemic. That seems like such a long time ago now, doesn't it? So today we're also going to be taking a look into addressing some of those risks when considering the future world of work. Now, we've brought together some amazing thought leaders, innovators to spotlight how AI is transforming risk management, to examine the growing importance of well-being, and address critical strategies and drivers of health and safety risks in the future world of work. So this presentation I'm saying it's packed. There's quite a few practical insights and really importantly, some global perspectives. Now again, my second prop. I'm going to actually ask you this time, have any of you seen this Arab report which we produced 3 years ago? It's a really quality document. Thank you, Sean. Please feel free to download it. A lot of my quotes that I'm going to use today have come from this particular document. And I guess what does it do? It poses questions. It asks us to consider what the future looks like, what future thinking should be, how we should frame that, and where the OSH profession, that's us, might be going. It's got calls to action for businesses, for leaders, governments, and us, the OSH professional. And it poses a fundamental question. Are we living through a time of rapid evolution, or are we living through a time of more fundamental revolution? I'm a much older OSH professional, and I know which way I lean. So as well as imagining future scenarios in which the skills of safety and health professionals will be challenged, that's us, it indicates ways in which they may, with the right development, meet such challenges. And to pose those challenges further, IOSH spoke to specialists in the field of climate change, AI and technology, mental health and well-being, and we're also looking at the gig economy. So let's see what they have to say.
What I've realized is that it's no longer a future event. Climate change is here. We're already seeing the real world consequences of that.
I don't think that you can rely on all employers to do the right thing when it comes to mental health. And when rules were first introduced about child labour, there were some employers who pushed against that and said that it would interfere with the freeness of the market.
There is much more economic pressure, and safety is always, unfortunately, impacted by poor economics.
So if there's 1.7 million workers in that gig economy in the UK last year, it's expected to rise by 300% by 2027.
New technologies are of course going to make us extremely vulnerable to third-party incidents because unfortunately there's just bad actors out there when it comes to technology.
We can see the change. It's subtle, but it is happening. And the truth is, climate change doesn't care about governments or borders or businesses.
If they'd grown up in a different generation, they would have a different relationship with their mental health, which might have benefited them.
From what we will experience in terms of increased heat, perhaps UV exposure, skin cancer for workers that we have outside, that's huge.
So we've seen that they might not necessarily get training that other employees will get. They might not necessarily get the information, the instruction, risk assessment, and those traditional health and safety protections.
Monitoring technologies like cameras and location tracking, GPS, for example, have significant benefits for workplace health and safety, but they also have the potential to introduce significant unintended consequences. And a lot of this has to do with micromanagement and big brother approach to how these technologies are implemented by our workplaces.
What we're saying actually is that let's look at all workers as workers and let's just make sure they've got the same protections that all employees have so that we can support their health, their safety and their well-being. So regardless of that status, let's just make sure that there are arrangements in place.
Why are we using these technologies? And if a worker is taken along for the journey, if they're engaged early, if they're provided an opportunity to design the solution, to be participants in the selection, in the testing, in the implementation, we're going to get a far better relationship with technology and the ability to maximise those benefits and mitigate all of those unintended consequences.
What I do believe is that fundamentally we are quite intelligent professionals who are capable of figuring it out. We can solve these problems, and what we have to do is kind of win hearts and minds, refine the comms and just push through that resistance in organisations to a point where sustainability is everybody's job and this is just the way we operate and it's not even a question.
Connection is a fundamental human need and it's really the cornerstone of everything when it comes to mental health. When you actually listen with the intention of understanding, you will find yourself saying things like, oh, I've never thought about it that way, or nothing like that has ever happened to me or anyone that I know of. What's that like? That's a far more helpful response.
If we want to improve the workplace for everyone, then we need not only to ask as low as reasonably practical, but as fair as reasonably practical. We need to think about safety from the lens of equity and inclusion and fairness, and not solely an issue of safe. Think learn and unlearn and be prepared to challenge your own beliefs, views and approaches.
We'll hear more from some of those speakers a little bit later. So I guess the Arab report is about asking a series of what-if questions about how things might develop. And this gives us food for thought. Now, I'm not going to read all of those what-ifs. There's a couple on there that really stand out for me. As well as imagining future scenarios in which the skills of safety and health professionals will be challenged, the report indicates ways in which they may, with the right development, meet such challenges. So we pose these questions to specialists in the field. But before we see their responses, let's take a moment to reflect. Now, the gentleman that you saw speaking there, James Pomeroy, he's the Global Health, Safety and Environment Lead for, at Arup, rather the Director at Arup. James was heavily involved in the production of the Arup report, the IOSH, the Future World of Work. Now, James has been in health and safety for more than 30 years, and he gives us an account of how the profession has changed profoundly in those 30 years.
I joined safety in the early 90s, and that was somewhere about 20 years after the Health and Safety Act had come into fruition. It was also a time that the UK was joining the European Union and taking on the six-pack and all of the changes that emerged. So when I think about the changes that I've seen in 30 years of being involved in safety, I think that they really fall into potentially 5 to 6 areas. The first of which is, I think about the nature of our role. Our role is very different now. It's actually much more strategic in terms of influence, and it's on the board agenda in a way that I couldn't have envisaged when I started my career. I think the scope and the nature of the risks and opportunities that we advise on are much more varied. When I started, I was being trained on machinery guarding. I even had training in mine safety because we still have mines at that point in time. But now when I think about it, we're talking about well-being, we're talking about health, and much more about sustainability. There's also a recognition of wider business risks and how those business risks impact upon safety. I think thirdly, there's a recognition of the importance of safety in a way that hadn't necessarily been there before. When I think about early on in my career, it's very much a procedural, a compliance issue. It is much more an issue of governance, seen as a strategic risk, and it's also seen as a human right, an issue of dignity at work. I couldn't have dreamed of having those sorts of conversations years ago. I also think there's been a change in beliefs. What we believe as professionals and also as individuals changes as we go through life. Many of the things that I was taught early on in my career, I no longer believe, and the profession equally questions. So there's an emergence of what we think and believe and how we keep people safe. And finally, I think there's an issue of complexity. The world that we work in now is a world where safety is impacted much more by the world around it, whether that's trade agreements, the ability to move beyond borders, the people that work in our workplace and the cultures and nationalities, but also the types of risks that we're involved in. We're talking about issues about health and well-being, about sustainability, about the nature of strategic risks and how they impact safety. So there's been much more complexity, much more than perhaps the simple world that I started with 30 years ago.
So one of the key areas of focus was around mental health. And what if psychological injuries and mental health are regulated in the same way as physical risks? And as I mentioned before, there's a need for a broader action on well-being and mental health. In today's workplace, mental health is no longer a side conversation, or really shouldn't be a side conversation. It's an actual safety issue. As health and safety professionals, we're trained to prevent harm, reduce risk, and protect well-being. But what happens when that harm is invisible? So next we're going to go back and hear from Natasha. She's a mental health campaigner and a broadcaster who shares a powerful perspective on why mental health deserves the same regulatory attention as physical health and what we as OSH professionals can do about it.
It's so interesting because the first thing any mental health professional will tell you about self-diagnosis is don't do it. And yet, the services aren't there, which leaves many people, I think there are about 6 million people as we sit here who are currently waiting for NHS psychological services. The waiting list can be anything from 2 weeks, if you're extremely lucky, to 2 years, which is actually a more normal experience. There are all these people who are suffering and of course, are seeking answers elsewhere because they're not able to access the services. So to a degree, as an employer, you have to engage with people's self-diagnosis, even if they don't have a certificate or a piece of paper to prove it. I would be very wary of going down a route where we measure success in mental health in the workplace by people's symptoms and experiences. This is something that I was very concerned about with Ofsted inspections in schools, in fact, because what that does then is it incentivizes the schools not to allow pupils to disclose, because the more mental health issues they have within their cohort, the less successful they're seen to be as a school. And the same thing could happen in workplaces. So rather than focusing on what employees are experiencing, the focus should instead be on how employers are supporting anybody who might be experiencing those symptoms. I don't think that you can rely on all employers to do the right thing when it comes to mental health. And history teaches you that when rules were first introduced about child labour, there were some employers who pushed against that and said that it would interfere with the freeness of the market. And you will always have employers who are like that, just as you will always have employers who get it and understand how important it is and invest. So I do think that there needs to be some kind of legislation, some kind of government interference. As somebody who, I'm co-founder of a campaign called Where's Your Head At? And we are asking for parity between physical and mental health first aid in the workplace. Very simple. If you have a physical health first aider and you're required to do so by law in your workplace, there should be an equal and opposite mental health first aider, and just as many. However many physical you're required to have, you should have the same number of mental. And we were pushing for that because it was a really simple way to introduce some kind of parity. And yet the pushback against it was people saying, well, this isn't going to solve all mental health issues in the workplace. And we never claimed that it would, nor would we ever say that it would. But the perception seemed to be that that would become a flaw because employers would think, well, that's all I have to do, and I don't have to give any more support to my employees. I definitely think that different generations have something to teach each other, and it would be wonderful if they all recognised that and had these conversations. What I will say is, my experience of working with people who are in their early 20s now is that if you are displaying attitudes or using language that they consider to be unacceptable, they probably won't challenge you on it because the chances are that you'll be more senior or more experienced than them, but they will talk about it behind your back. So it's better, I think, to know and to go in with genuine curiosity to the conversation and ask them, where they're at with things like language. But I think there is a big fear or a perception that you can't say anything to young people that is so unhelpful, because connection is a fundamental human need, and it's really the cornerstone of everything when it comes to mental health. I think the best thing that all employers can do is try to anonymize the feedback process when it comes to how they can improve, because particularly with mental health, I think still a lot of people understand theoretically that it's okay to disclose their mental health challenges, but think in practice they will be seen as incompetent or not able to handle the workload, or that it's going to frustrate their career progression in some way. And then certainly when it comes to suggestions of how management can improve or how the workplace environment can be improved, a lot of people, particularly women, don't want to be seen as difficult in the workplace, so won't express those. If you find a way to genuinely anonymize it, so people can submit their feedback and you don't know who it's come from, you will get such helpful suggestions. And in my experience, you will be surprised by how time and cost effective some of those are.
A lot of insightful comments there from Natasha. So mental health in some degree affects everybody, every workplace. And as Natasha reminds us, everyone's got a head. I don't mind sharing that I've suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder for more than 30 years. My early career was a paramedic in a helicopter in North Wales. You can imagine that that probably precipitated part of my condition. But I know what my triggers are. I manage my condition really, really well. And one of the things I do as part of my strategy is I talk openly about those challenges and how I got well. So I think it's time to move beyond awareness and into action, whether it's mental health first aid, anonymous feedback, or simply creating space for empathy, listening to each other. Remember, every step counts. So another key area of focus from the Arup report is on the future world of work around technology and digitization. And we all know that more and more jobs are becoming automated, and this is reshaping our world of work. So as safety professionals, we're often excited by the potential of new technologies. I certainly am, and how those can reduce harm and protect workers. But I ask you a question. What happens if those new tools that we introduce actually create issues that we're not yet prepared for? What if the application of the technology to improve worker safety and worker protection creates other health and safety well-being risks? Now, some predict that up to 81% of tasks, that's manual tasks, will be automatable through AI. We posed this to safety technologist specialist Cam Stevens. And Cam's going to give us an insight on the considerations we need to make in new tech. So let's take a look at Cam's thoughts.
Well, all digital technologies have cybersecurity risk, and artificial intelligence technologies in particular have new threats to our organisations. A really good example of that is deepfakes, things like synthetic voice cloning, where an organisation an employee might get a phone call from what they think is their manager asking them for some sensitive information, which they would normally divulge. But in this case, it might be actually a synthetic voice asking for that. So there are some really creative ways that bad actors are trying to penetrate organisations from a cyber perspective. And just like we need to manage health and safety risks by understanding the threats and identifying controls, we have to do that with cybersecurity risk as well. So it's not that we shouldn't be using these technologies, we have to be really understanding this new threat profile, this new risk profile, and coming up with just as creative ways to mitigate these risks as these bad actors are to try and get past our cybersecurity. There are absolutely use cases where machines outperform humans time and time again. A good example of that is using computer vision, machine learning, artificial intelligence for cancer cell diagnosis as a real classic example. But what these machines can't do is to have that human context, the human analysis, those critical empathy type skills that are needed to be able to pull together a lot of different disparate data sets and make sense of that. So right now it is absolutely about determining which use cases are better for machines to be taking the lead and which use cases are better for humans to be taking the lead. And this is not about and or, so humans or machines, it's about humans plus machines better together. AI automation in our workplaces will absolutely bring new risks to our enterprise. And what we need to appreciate here is a lot of those new risks are likely to be psychosocial risks. So physical risks get reduced by large-scale automation, particularly AI-based automation, but we're also now changing the paradigm and the nature of how work is performed through AI-assisted automation. And therefore, we have to be very clear about how these risks are coming into our organisations and what risk controls we need to put in place to mitigate those not really unintended, they should be forecastable risks that are coming into our business. It's up to us as health and safety professionals to forecast what those risks are going to be, to clearly understand them, and to put risk controls in place before we get those unintended consequences occur. So what got us to where we are won't get us to where we need to in the future. There are so many new opportunities to control risks with the application of new technologies. But these new technologies also bring new risks with those to the business. So as health and safety professionals, we need to look at ourselves as agents of change in the future of work, to anticipate these new risks, to understand that a lot of these new risks will be psychosocial in nature. We have to be curious, experiment, explore this modern working world and take charge and thrive in the future of work.
So Cam's shared some interesting insights, and I'm not going to read those for you. Clearly they're there up on the screen. But what I would say is that us as OSH professionals, we absolutely must be at the table for discussions about digital and technological intervention so that we can advocate for safety in design and worker-centred approaches. I think also we need to be really clear on what does regulation look like and what does enforcement look like. I mean, yes, we hear a lot about the ethics of AI, but do we really understand what that means in a workplace? Because AI is changing so rapidly. So yes, technology is helping us move forward in the way we protect workers from the environmental challenges, but it comes with some significant risks. Now, I said I wasn't going to read those points out, but I do really like that best outcome, human versus machine, that sort of coexistence between us and AI. In the next segment, we're going to come back to James Pomeroy. We met James a few videos back, and I'm not going to reintroduce him, but the point that James is making is that the world of work is very, very different, and how we navigate it needs to change. So let's hear what James has to say.
If we want to improve the workplace for everyone, then we need not only to ask as low as reasonably practical, but as fair as reasonably practical. We need to think about safety from the lens of equity and inclusion and fairness, and not solely an issue of safe. We also need to ask who's making those judgments on safety and how much we involve those who are affected by the decision making. Think, learn and unlearn, and be prepared to challenge your own beliefs, views and approaches.
I mean, again, some really insightful, if you like, perspectives from 30 years in the profession. Again, I really, really like learn, unlearn, relearn, challenging outdated beliefs to stay agile in a fast-changing world. Look, the world is changing, and we need to change with it, or sadly, potentially, risk irrelevance. Now, again, the Arab report has got some calls for businesses, for government, and really importantly for us as OSH professionals. And I think, mindful of time, I'm just going to ask you, if you do download the report using the QR code, please just read the section on what we believe that that you can do to support the workforce and to have your voice heard. So feel free, use the QR code. But I want to leave you with a thought. Our profession exists because people matter. Every regulation that we advocate for, every risk assessment we undertake, and we've done a few of those, every training session we deliver, every conversation we have with a colleague who seems stressed, all of it comes down to the fundamental belief that every person deserves to work without fear of injury, illness, or death. So in a world that often prioritizes speed and profit, we are the voices that must say, but at what cost? We're the professionals who ask the difficult questions, who challenge assumptions, who speak up when others might stay silent. And from our perspective, this is going to require us to be courageous, to evidence our expertise and work with conviction. So during this presentation, which has been, 35 minutes long, somewhere in the world, someone has died because of their job. In reality, that's somewhere near 333 people have died somewhere around the world while I've been talking. They were working while I was delivering this presentation, and now they're gone. We have the data, we have the technology, and amongst us we have the expertise to change this. The only thing that's missing is the scale of our action. So my final word is a challenge. What are you going to do about it? So thank you all very, very much for your time, and apologies for the few technical glitches, but I've delivered this session, I think, 7 or 8 times now, and I always find something new in it. So thank you very, very much. Thank you.